There's so much misinformation out there about snakes, snake handling, and snake bites. In this episode, we will find out whether or not the majority of the snakes that our snake heroes find are venomous or non-venomous. We will also find out what handling methods they use to mitigate the dangers of working with venomous snakes and what really happens to snakes when they are released back into the wild.
It's really difficult to break down how many venomous and non-venomous snakes I encounter because I work so extensively in the field. I do a massive amount of work in places like Namibia, northern Mozambique. I've worked in Malawi, and so I think that if one had to sum it up over many, many years of field work, I probably find a lot more non-venomous snakes than venomous snakes in the field situation. But it varies dramatically. So, for instance, I collected statistics for my time at Sun City, at the crocodile farm there, and I think something like 80% of the snakes encountered over a 3-year period were potentially lethal. Yet in Montclair, where I grew up, I never ever found a single potentially lethal snake. So it depends very much on where you are.
More than half of what I actually go out to catch are venomous snakes. As I say, quite often people are happy to leave the harmless snakes alone. They're not worried about them, or they've disappeared already. But very few people are happy to leave a mamba or a cobra somewhere in the garden or the garage. If you tell me what road you live in, I can tell you, yes, you do get mambas there, or no, you don't, but if you go across the road, you will. So Durban itself it's a very diverse area. There's hills, there's river courses, there's valleys, there's flat grassland areas. There are certain pockets, like areas in Kloof, where you find in a single little area, you'll find black mambas, wormslung, vine snake, spitting cobras, and puff adders in that one little pocket area. Cresthome's another example where you find a large number of venomous snakes. And then in Westville, certain parts, you find bush snakes and house snakes. So it varies according to the specific habitat in the area, how built up the area is. Built up areas can't tolerate many big venomous snakes like mambas, wormslung, and cobras, but they have an abundance of night adders, which are venomous but not deadly.
On my call out, the majority of the snakes that I come across are normally harmless snakes. I'd say probably only about 20% of them are highly venomous snakes. But in saying that, you can go to someone's house and be given a description of a snake, and the description that you've been given is quite vague. So you've always got to kind of just assume that what you're looking for could potentially be something dangerous, and you just got to be careful. So don't just rush in and assume that it's probably going to be something harmless, because it may not be, but the majority of them are harmless snakes.
So if you go out into the field and you go and you hunt for snakes, it depends very much on what sort of snake hunting that you're doing as to whether you're going to find predominantly non-venomous or venomous snakes. So for example, when I was a kid, I used to often go and open up old termitaria, and most of the snakes that you find in that sort of micro habitat are reasonably small snakes, and so most of them are not that dangerous. However, a lot of our research involves focusing on particular species. So I've done work, for example, on southern African pythons and puff adders, and when you start studying a particular species and you become familiar with its life history, you tend to find many more of those particular types of snakes. And so if you're studying puff adders, you tend to find lots of puff adders, for example. And at the moment, we're involved with a project that's focusing in on how Cape cobras and boomslungs are impacting sociable weavers in the Kalahari. And we can go out and we find effectively a few Cape cobras every day, because we have got a window into their biology now. So I think it depends on the sort of snake hunting that you're doing as to whether you're going to find the majority are dangerous or not. When I was a student down in Durban, I had a relationship with the snake park. I used to work at the snake park on the weekends, and I used to log all of the snakes that were brought in from the public to the snake park. And under that circumstance there, over 90% of the snakes that were brought to the snake park were not dangerous snakes. So some of them would have been mildly venomous and so on and so forth. So although you do get several highly dangerous snakes in that area, they tend to make up a very small proportion of the total number of snakes that are found by humans.
Majority of snakes I get called for are probably harmless snakes. But most of the time for those snakes, I just advise people what to do. I try to encourage people to leave the snakes because, you know, we don't want to remove all the snakes out of suburbia. So I feel like we do need some snakes around. And if it's a non-venomous snake, it can't hurt you or pets. So I try and encourage people to do that. I do go on the odd non-venomous snake call, especially if it's in the house. People obviously don't want to leave it then. But yeah, I do a lot of calls for venomous species as well.
By far the majority of snakes that we encounter in our surveys are not dangerous to humans. And when I say not dangerous, I mean not potentially lethal to humans. It's only very rare occasions where we find the very venomous species, puffedders, mambas, cobras, to be numerous or prevalent in an area.
You can't really miss a cobra making a hood, where a little house snake hiding under the fridge might be able to get out again the next day and disappear. With the bigger snakes, they get seen more often, and people will keep an eye on them until you can get there and actually remove them.
Cobras, mambas, wormslungs, puffedders, these are big snakes that are quite conspicuous, so people tend to see them much more easily than they see the small non-venomous species like brown house snakes, for example. And I think that if you are a person that's living in suburbia on the edge of town, not actually looking for snakes, the chances that you're going to see a large snake and it's going to be venomous is going to be higher. So I think it's just a sampling bias, really.
The majority of snakes I catch on a daily basis, 90% of the time is the wrinkles. The scientific name is Hemacartus hymacartus. They are everywhere here. They play dead and spit their venom. You can identify them. They're a grey snake with white bands and they make a hood like a cobra. The other species are the Cape cobra. We have the boomslang here as well, the Harold snake, the brown house snake, egg eaters, and that's the most which I catch here. But 90% of the time, like I said, is the wrinkles.
I've never owned antivenom. I've never really kept it. I don't really have a easy access to it. Our emphasis at the African Snakebite Institute is on prevention. And my advice to people is, in the event of a bite, is just get to the nearest hospital with a trauma unit. That's all you really need to do. And if we look at the statistics, we know that close on 90% of snakebite victims that are hospitalized don't need and don't get antivenom. But when you need it, you need it.
No, I don't keep any antivenom. Would be a nice idea. Problem is it's very, very expensive and it's got a shelf life. So if I've gone and spent 15 or 20,000 Rand on antivenom and I'm keeping it with me in the car all the time, in a cooler box or whatever, it's not going to last very long. It's probably going to only have a shelf life of about 3 years. You know, living in Durban, there's a lot of hospitals around, a lot of private hospitals, good hospitals, and the majority of them have got antivenom. I know that for a fact. So I'm not going to go out of my way to keep it myself. Rather just rely on the hospitals. And if I do get to a hospital and they don't have antivenom, I know that it's quite easy for them to get antivenom from one of the neighboring hospitals. I suppose also because you can't self-administer antivenom anyway, so it's not going to help me if I've got antivenom in my car and I've been bitten by a black mamba, because I can't administer it myself. I can kill myself just by doing that. So, you know, I'm going to be taking the antivenom with me to the hospital in any case. So I may as well just cut the antivenom out of the picture and not have it and just go to the hospital and they'll have it.
We stock various antivenoms at our institution, indigenous as well as exotic, because we do have some exotic species. It would be irresponsible for us to actually stock these animals without the necessary antidotes. The reason why we actually stock antivenom at the park is we've seen this previously at certain hospitals. You will actually land up at a hospital and they actually won't have the antivenom on hand to actually treat a bite. The reason for this is varied. Hospitals might not see a number of bites each year. The antivenom is very expensive and they might not never use it, and it's only got a shelf life of around 3 years, and in that period they might never see any snake bites. So for them to go and take a lot of capital invested into antivenom, this does not make sense. when there are a number of other diseases out there like tuberculosis and HIV, which is a huge problem in Southern Africa.
I don't keep antivenom on me. There are a few reasons for this. The first reason is it's expensive. The second reason is to treat a bite from a large mamba, I'm going to need 12 to 15 ampules, and at the cost that it is, it's preclusive. Another part of that is it's a medical substance that if it's injected incorrectly or into an allergic sort of person, which I'm likely to be, I could have an anaphylactic reaction to the antivenom itself, which will kill me quicker than the snake bite would. They treat you relatively quickly and effectively at a hospital. So for me to carry antivenom with me in my vehicle, it's going to expire, it's expensive, and the use of it could be dangerous to me. It would be counterproductive. There's also that thought that if you have antivenom with you, you can afford to be more reckless because you're safe. Not really my thought, but that does occur to you as well.
We keep plenty of antivenom here on the farm. I keep at least 20 ampules of polyvalent antivenom. I keep 2 ampules of boomslang antivenom. I keep 2 ampules of the monovalent Echis antivenom for the saw-scale vipers. The reason we keep our own antivenom is if you get a bite, you can go to the hospital. There might be snakebite expertise there in the form of an emergency doctor that knows what he's doing. But when he needs antivenom and he hasn't got it, then he's got to start looking for it. And any delay in snakebite, in serious snake bites, is not good. You want the antivenom in the victim as soon as possible. So for me, I'd rather keep the antivenom. I have a bite, antivenom, and whoever was bitten goes to the hospital. If they don't need our antivenom, they've got their own, it's fine. If they didn't have antivenom, it's also fine, we've got our own antivenom. So that's the way we operate.
A question that I'm commonly asked is, do I carry antivenin with me when I'm doing field work? And the answer is no. Antivenin should only be administered by somebody that knows what they're doing. For example, introducing it into your body with an injection that's intramuscular is really not going to help you if you've been bitten by a snake. But particularly in my case, I am very sensitive and I react very badly to snake venom. And in fact, when I have had it, it's caused me to go into complete anaphylactic shock and has stopped my heart. So I certainly don't carry it. It's more likely to kill me than any snake biters.
In the situation here in Swaziland, going to a hospital is awesome, but going to a hospital that doesn't have any antivenom in the fridge is tragic. So you need antivenom. So absolutely, my fridge always has antivenom. I have antivenom for my snakebite volunteers who go out and rescue. I could never ask somebody to go and reply or answer a call to go and catch a snake if there's a risk that that person gets bitten and I can't assist by giving that person antivenom. So yes, I do have antivenom, and I've also set up several antivenom banks in Swaziland where we can collect antivenom from. Now these are just collection points where antivenom is kept in a specific area, and if any of the handlers get bitten, they can go to that point and collect antivenom. And it's a lot more risky where we are. And I only realized how risky it was when I realized how many people got bitten. But even if you are rescuing snakes, you can't administer the antivenom yourself. It needs to be administered in a hospital setting. But how many people actually know where to go to if they get bitten? If you are, for instance, living in Badplaas and you rescue a snake and you get bitten, where are you going to go to? What is your plan? How are you going to help yourself if you do get bitten? You can't just take a chance and tata my chance and somebody will be there to help me. You need to know, where do I go? Besides the fact that not every hospital has antivenom, and that's a cruel reality, even in South Africa, not everybody knows how to use antivenom. So, yes, you're the big hero and you go and catch that Cape Cobra, but if you get bitten, do you know that you're going to survive that bite? People don't think the things through. They don't think through what will happen if something does go wrong. And it's something that every snake handler and catcher must consider. It's awesome to go onto Facebook and you're holding a big black mamba and But did you tell your medical aid that this is what I do as a hobby, or this is what I do as a passion, or is if I get bitten and I need to go into ICU for a week, are you going to pay my bill? And that's a question every person who works and does what we do should ask themselves is, am I sorted, or am I just playing Russian roulette? This is it, it's a lifestyle, and unfortunately a lot of people are doing it, I'm sorry to say this, for hits on Facebook. And that's the wrong reason. That is a very dangerous way to look at rescuing snakes. You have to be responsible. I think you have to be responsible for our hobby, for what we do. You have to be responsible to your parents and your family, and you have to be responsible to our community. The people that are passionate about what we do, you owe it to all of those people to make sure that you survive that snake bite and you survive that experience without having to sell your car and your house and your comic books. You need to make sure that you've got all your bases covered.
I don't keep antivenom on me. It expires, you've got to keep it refrigerated, and also you don't want to administer it yourself in case you have an allergic reaction to it. Plus it costs a lot of money. So no, the plan is just to get to hospital as quickly as possible. Should anything go wrong, but the plan is for nothing to go wrong.
We don't travel or work with antivenom. It's just simply too dangerous to apply antivenom in the field without the correct medical training. First of all, it's almost impossible to keep the stuff cool in the right temperature that it needs to be. And second of all, it's very dangerous because it's equine serum. It can create a serious anaphylactic reaction in the field, which will kill you quicker than the actual venom of the snake will if you had to administer it and you didn't know how to treat the anaphylaxis properly. When we travel to very rural places in Africa, we generally make sure that there is some hospital close by that has antivenom in store so that we can be evacuated to the hospital in cases where, if we had to get bitten. But in South Africa, we don't really concern ourselves with that because you can get to almost anywhere to a hospital that has antivenom within 4 or 5 hours if you apply the correct first aid treatment.
Keeping antivenom is great if you know that the hospital doesn't have. You can take your own supply with you and they will then give it to you. The problem is, like with all medication, it only lasts for 3 years. So it's very expensive. You're buying it and after 3 years, you're throwing it away. So it's better to make sure that your local hospital has the antivenom, and if not, ask them why not. When you've got enough antivenom there and you get to the hospital, they will put up a drip and they will monitor you, and as soon as you show enough symptoms that you require antivenom, they will give you the antivenom, and it usually reverses the effect that the snake's venom has on you. The quicker you get antivenom into a person, obviously the better it is for that person. And so if you get bitten, just get to a hospital that's got antivenom, that's got doctors that are trained, and they will be able to sort you out.
The reason why I don't keep antivenom at our facility is firstly because it has to be administered by a medical facility, a doctor, a nurse or something like that. The second reason is it costs more than our house, and it expires, so I'm not really gonna do that when I just can go to the hospital and they can administer the antivenom to me.
When I'm doing reptile surveys, I only carry a stump ripper. So it's like a snake hook with a titanium tip in the front that's really, really strong enough for you to hook it in a tree and climb up it, or to put a big rock over. And that's all I ever carry. Of course, a bunch of bags and containers to containerize whatever I capture. But for venomous snakes, I will prefer a 1 meter snake tongue. I really enjoy tongues. I've been using them all my life. They're fantastic. So depending on the snake, most snakes I would neck. I would get it close to the head, get it behind the head, get it into a bag if that's all I have. Mamas especially, once you've necked them and you have them in, it's very easy to secure them. So that's sort of pretty easy. However, in all our training, we don't recommend that people use bags because of snakes biting through them. And of course, a lot of people don't have a lot of experience. So, having worked with a lot of venomous snakes over the last 40 years, I'm very comfortable with tailing them, necking them, doing whatever I have to. But we are very careful about what we teach people to do that don't have a lot of experience.
When it comes to catching snakes like black mambas and even large spitting cobras, I prefer to use tongs, and I prefer to grab the snake behind the head so I secure that head. With spitting cobras, I mostly do that so that I don't get spattered a whole lot, because if you pick one up by the tail and a hook stick, you do get spat at a whole lot. And I know people who've become allergic to those snakes, to their venom, just from being spat at a whole lot. So I also wear a visor to help protect my face, but you know that venom is still in the air. So the less I get spat at, the better. With black mambas, you don't want to pull it out by the tail out of a messy storeroom or out of someone's ceiling. You won't come away unharmed with that. So I always pin the head down and make sure I secure that. Also, you know, if the black mamba starts thrashing around, not only could you get bitten, but he could damage himself, he or she. So I definitely think it's safer to secure that snake's head. And then I put it in a bucket. Guys do use the pillowcases, which is fine. I'm not comfortable using a pillowcase, and also back of my mind the snake could bite through the bag. So I prefer to use buckets, but yeah, guys do use bags and pillowcases.
I don't believe putting snakes in bags. I know there are lots of snake catchers that prefer keeping and traveling with the snakes in bags. I think it's also risky. Too many people that I know have been bitten through the bag. Even my mentor Mike was bitten by a forest cobra through a snake bag, and he actually lost his finger.
A snake hook, a snake tongue, and a container. We prefer hard containers to bags, because bags you end up with something like this, and I think people will agree it's not a good idea to get bitten through a bag. You can prevent it. So don't use bags.
My preferred method, which a lot of people laugh at me, is I let the snake catch himself. I have enough equipment which I've manufactured over the years that I can convince the snake that this is a place for him to hide. He climbs in there, I close him up, and I take him back into the bush, open it, throw him out, and off he goes. That is the easiest method. When you start looking at methods where the snake is now underneath a chair or underneath a couch or something, you've got to physically pull the snake out there and make sure you've got the snake in some safe container, and then take him back to the bush or wherever he came from and release the snake. During those situations, the further you can stay away from the sharp end, which is the teeth, the better it is. So I prefer to grab them by the tail, hook them, show them a hiding place, they climb in there by themselves, and the problem is solved. But sometimes you have to get to the point where you physically restrain the snake, grab him by his head, grab him by his tail, gently take him, put him into a container, make sure when you let go that he doesn't turn around and bite you, and then you can take him and release him. Some snakes you cannot pick up. If you pick up a stiletto snake, no matter how you pick it up, it will bite you. So you need to know which snakes are you dealing with. And it takes time and experience. And no matter what you've seen on TV, it's not that easy. But it's also not that difficult. With the right training, it's very easy. With the right equipment, it's very easy. And equipment can range anything from a thing as simple as I've used a coat hanger in the past, all the way through to very developed equipment which you can grab the snake at a distance, which is a pair of tongs, and you can move him and put him into a bucket or a box or whatever you're going to move him in. The risk with every instrument that you use is always there. In some cases, the snake can jump off it. In other cases, you're actually injuring the snake. So I've seen numerous people with a snake that they've grabbed with the snake tongs, and they're going to go and let the snake go. And I tell them, why? You might as well have killed it, because you've broken so many ribs in the time that you caught it because you're nervous that the snake will probably die in any case. So you're not really doing the snake any favors. So you need to be able to practice and practice and practice until you get to the point where you can comfortably catch the snake without harming him in any way and putting him back into an area where he can hopefully survive.
If we don't have to handle them, we just simply don't. We can take a photograph from a distance if necessary. Black mambas we never handle because it's just too dangerous in the field and it's just too likely that something might go wrong. So that's the first precaution. The second precaution is we use gloves when we handle venomous species most of the time, just to avoid a potential bite. And then, of course, for first aid treatment, we always carry with us a pressure bandage, crepe bandage, a series of them. as well as a bag valve mask. But I think the most important precautionary mechanism to avoid snake bite is just that, is to avoid it, is to not get yourself into a situation where you're handling the animal excessively or trying to do things that you're not supposed to be doing with the animal so that you get bitten.
If you know what you're doing, you're not going to hurt the snake, you're not going to kill it. It's a gentle grip that you exert on the snake. Yet it does control the snake. It gives you a high degree of safety.
If you look at snake handlers worldwide at reptile facilities, at major zoos and research facilities, they make extensive use of hooks, and I have no problem with hooking and tailing. Of course, I never hook and tail puff adders or gaboon adders, never ever. I don't like that at all. A lot of people do it, not my scene. As far as tongues go, a lot of people are very critical about snake tongues, but it's like any tool. It depends on the hands that are using it. And if you use tongues well, they're no problem whatsoever. I'd be quite comfortable in saying that I firmly believe that I've never hurt a snake with tongues. It's a great piece of equipment.
My preferred method of catching venomous snakes, well, depending what the snake is, will determine what equipment I use, whether I use a hook stick or a grab stick. Generally, I'll be using one of the two. With mambas or snakes that are in trees, like boomslang and green mambas, I'll prefer to use a grab stick. And I like to secure the snake really quickly, get the snake to reverse into the grab stick until I've got it behind the head, and then very quickly grab it behind the head so that it doesn't spend much time in the grab stick. Because you see a lot of people catching snakes with grab sticks, and they pretty much let the grab stick do all the work, where they're grabbing the snake and holding it there, and they're having to really squeeze to make sure the snake doesn't squeeze out of it, and the snake is writhing and trying to spin, and they can hurt themselves really badly. So I try and make the snake spend as little time in the grab stick as possible. So literally get the tongs on it, let the snake reverse into the tongs until it gets jammed behind the head, and then very quickly reach down and grab it behind the head with my hands. Then the head is secure. He's in your hand. It's got a nice soft grip. You're not hurting him in any way. You are restraining him, but you're not hurting him. And then from there, I like to put them in a bucket. Lots of people will prefer to put them into bags. I've done the bagging story with snakes, but I don't really like it. I'll do it if I have to. But I find it a lot easier to just get the body into a bucket and just have the head just and my hand sticking out, and then have the lid placed onto the bucket, and then at the very last minute you throw the head in and close the lid. That's what I've found to be my safest sort of way. Also don't like the tubing method. Once again, you have to hold onto the snake for far too long while you're trying to manipulate it to go into a tube. So there's it's not like you take the snake and aim him at the tube and you just go straight in. Sometimes it takes 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 attempts, and during that time there's a lot of things that can go wrong.
Before I started extracting venom from snakes, I didn't own a snake tongue. I did everything with a snake hook. Whether it was going to catch a large python, a mamba, a large cobra, puff adder, it doesn't matter. I just had a hook or 2 hooks. When I started extracting venom from the snakes, I needed to control that snake's head. I needed to neck the snake so that I could extract the venom. I then got myself snake tongues, and I've been using them extensively. We haven't got any snakes that are hurt. You know what you're doing, you won't hurt the snake with a snake tongue. If you're scared of the snake, right, you can hurt the snake with a snake hook. So it's all in the training. A lot of people might just get equipment and start doing their own thing, but it's probably better to get some schooling under an expert so they can tell you the ins and outs and what to avoid and how to use things and what the different techniques are.
I can catch mambas or boomslang or spitting cobras using a hook stick, but sometimes for the sake of speed and effectiveness, I'll use the tongs far rather than a hook stick. Remember, I'm not dealing with snakes out in the wild where it doesn't matter if they get away. I'm dealing with snakes in people's houses, where if that thing gets away from me now, it's gone behind the fridge or the stove or the pile of wood or underneath the car. So I work quickly and effectively. For me, what I generally do is I try and grab the snake by hand, by the tail if possible, and then using the grab stick, I'll restrain the snake. Some people believe grab sticks or tongs can injure the snake. I don't believe they do if you use them correctly. With a hook stick, which is great, but then you have to have hands on the snake as well, which not a lot of people like doing. I personally don't mind, but you cannot hook and lift a snake. It's going to jump off the hook stick. So with me, it's hook and tail, or grab stick and then restrain. With a grab stick as well, you don't just grab the snake and drop it in a tub. The grab stick to me comes with a secondary aspect where you have to have respect for the snake and knowledge of how the snake moves. And when it pulls its head back level with the point of the grab stick, that is when you restrain the head with your hand. So you don't just leave a snake flapping around on a grab stick hoping that he's going to go in the bag or the bin or the bucket or whatever it is. So all of these tools come with a certain amount of training and understanding of the snake itself.
You can't teach somebody on a one-day course how to rescue snakes and tell them to go out there with a snake hook. It's totally irresponsible. Learning how to catch a snake by tailing takes many, many months of practice. Yes, I do. With a lot of the cobras and so on, I'll just use a snake hook and tail the snake. But it's not something that comes naturally and very quickly. It takes years of experience. No skill can you learn overnight or a one-day snake course. This takes months and months and months of practice, getting to understand snakes, getting to understand and predict how they will move.
Yeah, obviously the benefits of using snake handling tools like hook sticks and grab sticks is that you don't have to use your hands to grab hold of the snake or to restrain it, so that keeps you safe. But sometimes they have their limitations, because if you can imagine a snake down a hole where the hole bends slightly, you can't stick a straight stick down that hole to get the snake, because the stick doesn't bend. Yeah. So quite often you've got no real choice but to use your hands. Also in very, very thick vegetation, they have their limitations because they get snagged on things, and when you're trying to reach out with, say, a pair of tongs, you're trying to go through thick foliage to grab hold of a black mamba that's moving, you could get snagged up on branches. When you're trying to close the mouth of the grab stick over the snake, just things get in the way, sticks and twigs and leaves. So they have their limitations, but they've also got their very important place.
Another tool I always carry is, apart from the snake sticks and a visor, is a torch. It's hugely important because snakes are often in homes, in storerooms, in ceilings and cupboards and dark places. They go there to hide, so a torch is definitely useful. I would love a hammer, because I often do demolition jobs, breaking down people's walls or pavings. People let you do anything to get rid of a snake for them.
The two most important tools that you use when you capture snakes is either what we call a snake hook, which is similar to a golf shaft with a hook put on the end of it. Not a hook like you'd hook a fish with, but just basically a curved piece of aluminium. Or you can use the snake tongs, which you see a lot, where it's like a clamp. You can actually grab the snake and pull him closer. And each of those have advantages and disadvantages. The advantage of the hook is it's very gentle and it's very slow on the snake. So you can basically just pick him up with that and drop him into whatever you're going to move him in, be it a box, a bucket, or a bag. With the tongs, you're grabbing the snake and the snake feels like he's being bitten. So he can turn around and he can react. If over time you've learned how to use exactly the right pressure, you can pick the snake up gently without actually clamping him and still allowing him to move that little bit, move him to an area where he can escape into whatever container you've got, and you can still take the snake away. So it's got to do with experience, and it makes no difference whether you're using hooks or tongs. Both of them work well, but they only work on snakes of a certain size. When you're looking at really small snakes, then you've got to start looking at other techniques where you can almost scoop them up, almost like with basically a broom and a bucket, and you can sweep them into an area and remove them that way. Because if you try to grab a small snake with a tong or a small snake with a hook, there's a very good chance that you could injure it. And once you've injured it, you may as well have killed the snake.
I don't carry a hook stick or a grab stick when I'm in the field because I need a multi-purpose tool to help me find snakes, because I'm not going to remove a snake where I know its location. And what my tool of preference there is a crowbar. And the reason it's for a crowbar is I can scrape in the soil dig pretty deeply in the soil with a crowbar for fossorial species. I can use the crowbar obviously to lift up rocks and see underneath rocks and shine my torch in there. I can use the hook of the crowbar to peel bark from a tree, all those kinds of things. And in the worst case, the crowbar is actually quite usable as a semi-hook stick if I have to catch a relatively large snake. Obviously, I won't be catching a 2.5 meter mamba with a crowbar, but a small cobra I can easily handle with a crowbar. So that's my tool of choice when I'm working in the field.
I use a pair of tongs, I have hooks, and I have gaiters and glasses, and then I have my buckets. I don't need more than that, so I'm not going to go and spend money on something that I don't need. It has worked for me, and that's what I use. The reason why I wear snake gaiters is because firstly, I don't want to take a chance, and when that moment, one day, I don't know if it will, but if it happens, and I see I can't move away quick enough, I know that I am protected. The second thing is my mom's very strict. And the third thing is I don't want to create an image out there for all the kids that one day want to handle snakes and maybe get bitten. And I just don't want to create that image and knowing that one day if a kid gets bitten, it's my mistake. And I don't want to do that.
If we're working with snakes like ambush foragers, like puff adders in a lab situation where we're moving snakes from one cage to another or into a bucket so we can clean the cages, then I will normally use an L stick to move the snake. But if it's a fast moving snake like a cobra or something like that, I use tongs even in a lab situation like that. It just gives me more control, and I think I'm fairly proficient with them, and I certainly don't damage snakes with them. So that's my thing of choice. But whenever we're trying to do a procedure on a snake, rather than grab the snake behind the head, because that's often when bites occur, we use a tube. So we'll tube the snake. That puts the snake under less stress. It's not physically restrained around its head. And then we can work with the snake in an entirely safe environment.
If it is a dangerous situation, like if it's near some barbed wire or something, I'll back away and let it move maybe into a more exposed area or into the bush. Because you don't want to anger the snake and it gets a fright and then gets caught in barbed wire or electric fence or something.
Patience is a virtue, where if it means having to damage a snake or kill the snake in order to get it out of the hole, maybe we should rather rethink this. Is it really necessary to get it out of the hole? There are situations where I've damaged property to get the snake out, and I must admit there are situations where a snake has been injured in the process as well, regrettably. I ensure that we work quickly, effectively, but with clear thought patterns. We don't just charge in like a bull in a china shop, smashing things and grabbing snakes by the tail. Because often once a snake sticks his head in somewhere and you grab him by the tail, he's now going to get injured with you trying to extract him.
So if you think about it, a snake is one long backbone with no limbs. And that means a snake is really easily damaged if it's physically abused. You just have to knock a snake on the back in the wrong place and you can actually break its back, and that's that snake doomed. So we're very careful about how we handle snakes. But when you ask the question about, are the snakes getting stressed when they're caught? Well, I'm sure that many snakes do undergo a fair amount of stress when they've been getting caught. Obviously, they don't know what's going to be happening to them. But what I can say is that in a lot of our studies, we use radio telemetry. So we'll surgically implant a transmitter into a snake and then release the snake a couple of days later. And those snakes will follow for up to 2 years and monitor the daily life of the snake and so on and so forth. And what I can say is that the results that we've got, those snakes that we've got those implants in breed, they mate, they feed, they do all those things that appear to be normal. So it would appear that they overcome the stress of being captured and they overcome the stress of the surgery and all the work, I might add, that we do on snakes is passed by the ethics committee at the university. And so we're always explicitly thinking about what sort of stress we are causing to the animal and how we can minimize that.
So what I do when I relocate and release a snake to make sure that it's going to have a healthy life, I release it in the area that they usually occur, where he can find water and find the foods that he needs.
When we capture snakes in the traps, they're unharmed. They just can't find their way outside of the trap. So we try and get them out of the trap as quickly as possible without causing any additional damage with them thrashing around, etc. And we handle them and keep them in bags, specifically because it calms them down. They're not in an environment where they feel they have to continuously escape. So, for example, if you had to put them in a clear plastic tub, they just try and escape the whole time and end up stressing themselves out. So we try and take those kind of small precautions. But then what we also do is we keep our handling to the minimum. We only handle them when we take them out of the trap, when we have to do any of the photography, and then when we release them safely. How do we know that these snakes are not harmed in the process? We mark them. So with ventral scale clippings, we cut a small notch into the scale on the belly, and by cutting only certain numbers of scales and different patterns, you can give them an individual mark. Once we release them, our likelihood is quite good to catch them again in the same trap in that survey. So we know that after a few days we can encounter the very same individuals, and they appear to be as healthy and unharmed as they were the first time around when we had caught them. So we're quite confident that our method of handling the animal or trapping the animal and handling the animal does not harm the animal in any way.
The way that I ensure that the animals that are catch and release aren't harmed in the process is that I obviously work very gently with them. Like I said earlier, I make sure they spend as little time in the grab stick as possible. That's if I'm even using a grab stick. But yeah, very little hands-on time with them, and then into a bucket or a bag. And then they need to be kept quite cool. So I mean, you can't go and leave them in your hot car when you're on another call. You've got to keep them quite cool. And then when you release them, you just got to make sure you release them in a suitable habitat. Basically the same sort of habitat where they came from. Because if you release them in the wrong habitat, they're going to go cruising out of there to go and look for a better place, and then they could come into human contact or cross roads and get hit by cars. So yeah, it's pretty much releasing them in the right spot as soon after capturing them as possible, so they're not sitting stressed in a box or in a bag for a few days, you know. So yeah, all of that combined, very little hands-on time with them, very little time that they spend in the capture box or bag, and then released into the right environment where they're going to be happy and they're going to settle.
The whole issue of catch and release is actually quite controversial, because the best evidence, and we need to do a lot more research, indicates that the majority of snakes that are relocated do not survive, and for a variety of reasons. It has nothing to do with the way that it's captured, but it has to do with the snake knowing its environment, knowing where to hide, knowing where to bask in the sun, knowing where to find food, and you now take it out of that and you release it elsewhere where you have snakes already, so it's competing against the snakes that are there. It takes a long time for that snake to settle down. While it moves, it's exposed to predators. And as I say, the evidence that we have, the research done on tortoises and some of the reptiles, a lot of that shows that there's a really high fatality rate. Some areas have a carrying capacity, well, most areas have a carrying capacity. So if a farm has room for 50 pufferers and you go and release another 10, where are they going to go? Where are they going to find food? Where are they going to hide? If there was food for another 10 and hiding places, there probably would have been another 10. And it gets more complicated, because where you remove the snake, you leave a vacancy. So there was a carrying capacity there. You take a few of them out of that environment and you leave vacancies so the next ones can move in. So I think until we have much better data, a lot of the catch and release has very little to do with conservation It has to do with satisfying our own ideas of what conservation is all about.
I do try and keep them as close to the area where the snake was caught. I'm fortunate that we live surrounded by game reserves and safe areas, protected areas. I don't travel that far, maybe 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers my maximum distance I have to travel. This is why we did a telemetry study a while ago on black mambas actually. We followed 12 black mambas for 9 months. We had 6 that were from that area and 6 that we had located from, I think, 80 kilometers away, and we studied them and looked at their movements and if being moved that distance would affect them. And not one of the snakes were affected. They bred, they shed, they ate, they found a new spot, and they lived there. After 9 months, they were still there.
Most of the snakes are released within, probably 2 or 3, 10 kilometers at most from where I find them. They've got to be released in a suitable niche habitat that suits their requirements. You can't take a snake from a forested area and go and release it in grassland. So there's forest snakes go back to the forest, grassland snakes back to grassland. Obviously it's tricky where you've caught a snake in suburbia. You can't just go and drop it in the neighbor's garden in the same suburbia. It'll probably survive, but that's not ideal. It's going to come into conflict with humans again. The only problems come in with really large species like mambas in suburbia, where you can't just pop them somewhere. I don't believe they establish themselves very well in a new area, so we've got to find an area that is well suitable for that species.
I like to release the snakes as close to where they came from as possible. That doesn't mean that I'm going to go catch a snake at someone's house and drive 25 meters down the road and let it go. But if I catch a snake in a particular area, I'm going to look for the closest natural habitat to that area as possible, because I don't want to upset the natural balance of nature. So I'm not going to take every snake that I catch and go and release it all into the same nature reserve and then overpopulate that nature reserve and underpopulate the area where they've been taken from. So I like to keep them as close to the place where they've been captured as possible. And that could be 5 kilometers away, it could be 10 kilometers away, but I try not to take them further than 15 kilometers from where they were caught. Otherwise I think you're just creating a really bad imbalance if you're taking them further than that, and that's just my personal opinion.
I always release snakes in the nearest nature reserve to where I've caught them. In the case of mambas and cobras, I generally catch them in homes bordering nature reserves or valleys, so I just take them into that reserve. I don't release it next door or in front of that property. I'll take it deep into the bush, like usually on the other end of the reserve, because the reserves aren't massive in Durban, and I release them there because that's where they've come from, it's where they belong, and they have to do their job there.
So many people that are involved with snake removals, problem snake removals, will microchip the snake. So that involves inserting a small passive transponder just under the skin of the snake. So you can't use that to physically track the snake, but you can use that to identify the snake the next time you catch it. You have a scanner that'll tell you a unique number on that transponder. So I think that's actually a very useful method, especially if you're using it for some of the rarer, larger, more dangerous species of snakes. For example, black mambas. It can give you the information of if you get called out to go and catch another black mamba in that area, is it the same black mamba that's coming back to that site, or is it a different one? It also means that if you can identify that snake exactly, that it's that individual that you caught 4 years ago, for example, you can then remeasure the individual and get an estimation on how fast the snake is growing. So I think that microchipping snakes is useful if you're in for the long haul and you're looking to do it in a rigorous way over many years. You can derive meaningful data in that way. But having transmitters in snakes that emit a pulse that you can track from kilometers away allows you a window into that snake's life. It allows you to go and find the snake at any time. And then you can go and make a whole lot of measures on the snake. What microenvironment is it choosing? What behavior is it performing at any time of the day? How is it moving in the environment? You can do all of those sorts of things with a transmitter that you can't easily do just with a microchip in the animal.
Again, with regards to snakes being released, we just don't have the data. We just don't have enough information, and much of what we believe is just pure assumption. And until we run a few more projects where we do radio telemetry and really follow a significant sample of snakes around for long enough to see how soon they settle down, how soon they find food, how well they survive, until we've done that, we just do not know. So I certainly prefer that a snake is captured and removed and released elsewhere rather than having its head chopped off, but I'm not sure that we're contributing to conservation.
So the technology that we use for tracking snakes now, our standard transmitter, is a device that's probably about that big. So most of that volume is taken up with the battery. So if we're studying species of snakes that are very small, there are much smaller ones you can get, but the battery doesn't last for as long. So if we're dealing with larger snakes and we're using our standard transmitter, those batteries will last for about 2 years. Okay, so the way that we insert them into the snake is anesthetized, and we perform surgery on it just as you would insert a transmitter into a human abdomen. So we put it into the body cavity and we thread the antenna. The antenna's about that long, about 30 centimeters or so, and we thread it under the skin so it's nice and straight and gives a good signal that we can receive with our antenna and receiver. But technology has moved on, and you get transmitters in a whole lot of different forms now. So for example, you get GPS transmitters, you get transmitters that store the information on the actual transmitter and then download it to a device when the transmitter is close to some receiver. There are a whole lot of variations on that now. But snake biology research has lagged behind in this technology, and one of the reasons for that is just the size of the devices, which are getting smaller every day, but also the fact that you can't put a collar on a snake. The only way for a long-term implant on a snake is to put it into the body cavity. A collar around a snake is going to interfere with it eating. You can't use any of the snake's limbs because it doesn't have any for attaching the transmitter. So we are limited in that respect.
Personally, I record everything that I catch on a daily basis, just a simple handwritten recording of what I catch, where I caught it, relevant details that might be important to me. I don't do a microchipping or a recording system. I don't have the budget to do that. Also, I personally don't have the need to do it. It would be interesting to see if we're catching some of the snakes again or where they're turning up, but I don't do that currently.
Yeah, I used to write everything down, from the address to the species, to the length, to the sex of it, whether it was pregnant or carrying eggs, whether it had a meal in its stomach, all of that, everything, if it had a scar on its body. And I was so strict with that, and I did it for years and years and years, and I just got a bit despondent when, you know, you spend so much time writing that stuff down and nobody ever needs it, nobody ever wants to look at it or asks you a question where you've got to refer back to it and you can help them. So yeah, I got a bit despondent that I was just wasting my time writing all of this stuff down.
Microchipping snakes that you release? Well, the first major problem that I have with that is that it's done randomly. They're not really registered projects with universities, and the people that are doing it, despite their very best efforts, I think are not collecting good data. So if people want to start chipping snakes and releasing them, go to university, link up with someone who works on reptiles, get an idea of the sort of data that you need to record. Because at the moment, all you can really record is if you weigh and measure a snake when you chip it and you release it and you capture it again sometime later, you can look at the gain in weight and in length. Where you find it just tells you that that's where it was when you found it. It gives you no indication of where it traveled, how far it's gone. You have no idea. So all I'm saying is that the data that you collect like that is quite frivolous, and it's not really going to prove a heck of a lot. I think from a benefit point of view, we know that the few projects that have been done, the recapture data is close to zero, very little data. Maybe it could help with the smuggling of reptiles. You know, if the snake is chipped and suddenly Joe or Harry, whoever now has an extra pair of mambas and you scan them, you can find out if those were released or not. So there could be a minor conservation implication.
One of the things I do with Mozambique spitting cobras is I record where I've caught them, date, time, because it is the snake responsible for the most snake bites each year in South Africa. So I record the times of day I catch them, and where around the house, in the house, you know, and then I take DNA from them for a genetics project focused on the cobras of the greater Durban area. With black mambas I do the same, exactly the same. Date, time, address, where it was caught exactly, length, all those details. I see if it's a male or female. And then with black mambas I do microchip them. So it's the same small little pit tag that's used in dogs and cats. And I microchip them to see if they return. So far I've chipped around 30. I've only had one recapture. He was first caught in someone's rat room. He was breeding rats. He went in there, got his rats, and then I took him out. He was then, about 6 months later, caught in a bird room. The guy was breeding canaries. So that snake was just clever, and maybe I will see him again. But yeah, it's also interesting, you know, just to see, because a popular belief is that black mambas always return to where they've been caught, but it seems that they don't. This was a project that was done a few years ago, which sort of fizzled out a little bit, so I've just been trying to keep it going.
There was a time that I was microchipping, but I was only microchipping black mambas, and it was for a little project just to try and establish how many of the mambas that we're catching are perhaps previous offenders. And so I was microchipping for quite a while, probably about 2 years, and I must have microchipped up to about 40 individual black mambas. But it got very costly. There was no one really sponsoring that, or at least there were very few sponsors, so a lot of it was coming out of my own pocket. But that's also something I'd like to be able to carry on doing. I just need funding. I can't come out of my own pocket. It just costs too much.
Microchipping snakes is one of those contentious issues because it's actually a medical procedure which you're performing on this animal. You're taking a small little microchip or a transponder and you're putting this underneath the snake's skin, and then you release the snake. If the snake is ever caught again, you can run a scanner over it, and once you've run the scanner over it, you know which snake it is, where it was caught, where it was released, and you can find out a little bit about its history. But you have to recapture the snake, and you have to know to keep checking with the receiver, which is the scanner that you're using. So in some cases, they have done some research in the Lowveld, and they released 114 mambas, and they only ever recaptured about 7 of them. So your chance of recapture is very slight, but it's not a bad idea to do that. However, you have to know what you're doing. These microchips can quite often be expelled from the body just naturally. It's like when they get a thorn under them, they will eventually expel it. So you need to know what you're doing, and the microchips are not cheap. So you're putting a microchip into a snake which is stressing it. Now you want to release it and have the snake live a normal, happy life, which in some cases is not going to happen if the microchip was not put in properly.
Well, that's that for this episode of Snake Heroes. In the next episode, we are going to be hearing some very strange stories from our snake heroes. I will see you there.